Happy to welcome you here to a seminar on a book by Professor Marco Armiero called Wasteocene, The Stories from the Global Dump, and published by Cambridge University Press in 2021. It was published again as a translation by Rosa Luxemburg-Stiftung Office in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2023 under the title Wasteocene, priče sa globalne deponije. So participants of this book seminar, and it will be also the order of their speaking, are Marco Armiero, ICREA research professor at the Institute for History of Science, Autonomous University of Barcelona. Since 2019, he has been the president of the European Society for Environmental History. And from 2013 to 2022, he was the director of the Environmental Humanities Laboratory in Stockholm, Sweden. We are very happy to have the pleasure of having him here in person. Next to him is Damir Arsenijević from the University of Tuzla. He is a scholar in the field of literary and critical theory, and the man who should be credited with this translation, Seeing Lights, which is very important. So thank you, Damir, also for that. To my left is Andrija Filipović, Associate Professor, Faculty of Media and Communications in University, Belgrade, Deleuze scholar, philosopher, art theorist, Anthropocene theorist, and currently doing interesting research on the early use of plastic in Yugoslavia, so probably we'll hear something about that. Marijan Ivković, sociologist, social and political theorist, senior research fellow, and coordinator of Critic Lab, Laboratory for Social Critique, Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade. Online, we have joining us Vukan Marković, research assistant at the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory, historian and doctoral student at Cambridge University, where he is writing his PhD thesis titled The Anthropocene Challenges to the Understanding of Historical Time as the Recurring Sense of Crisis in History. My name is Vera Mevorah. I am a research fellow here at the Institute of Philosophy and Social Theory. I will be your moderator today, which means that any and all frustrated expectations I should be blamed for them completely. So I will give a short introduction, after which each of our speakers will have, first Professor Armiero will speak for about 7 minutes, presenting his views of his book. After that, each of the speakers will have approximately 5 to 7 minutes to present their views, and Professor Armiero will take up to 5 minutes to have a reply or comment. Hopefully, when we all finish, there will be time to open the discussion to the audience. So I was very happy when I got the invitation to moderate this event, because for the past year, I think we've been trying to form some kind of maybe even more activist and research group that would focus on what an Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory can do to address the ecological crisis. And it turned out very quickly, at least for me, that these questions are much more complicated than it would seem from an activist perspective. It made me realize that the only responsible way for research institutions to address these issues is with very serious considerations, with opening the field for thinking, with debate. And I'm very happy that I think that this seminar is an important part of that. I think that Marco's book really opens up really a wide space. And I'm actually in that way sorry that we are not here a panel of 10 or 20. I think there is really a space for this. When we're talking about history or any kind of other storytelling practice, if we're talking about activism or creativity or political theory or the ecological crisis itself, I think that there are so many angles from which we should think about Wasteocene. And hopefully we will hear some of those angles today. And what I want to address before giving words to Marco and to the rest of the speakers is what attracted me most in his book. And this is this reconceptualization of waste or wasting. And also to stress what I think is really important, that this book was translated and how translations open up, actualize thinking about important issues. So Marco Armiero wrote, I quote, "Wasteocene is not about material stuff, but the socio-ecological relationship making someone or something disposable." So this relationship of disposing, of removing, of excluding, putting aside, I think are present, and this is also something that Professor Armiero speaks from time immemorial. This is something that's always been present. I think that after reading this book, that it can be said that it forces us more, in a sense, to question and view this underlying structure of exclusion present everywhere, then even in sense of making us rethink the way we approach solving of the ecological crisis. I think, so in Serbia creation, or BHSM, lovingly called today our language in liberal circles, the word for waste is otpad. So its etymology and uses, I think, naturally branch towards all these significant readings that Marco illuminated in his book, which I think that in English, of course, are present in some way, but really surprised me how much in our language these meanings seem to be exploding from within. This conceptual package held in the concept of Wasteocene, as well as in many very real toxic realities, are, I think, readily available, as is in our language in our region as well. So the roots of the word otpad are od, so literally translated as from, signifying distance and difference, and pad as fall, leading to the meaning of something falling out, broken away from the whole, no longer of any significance or value. The verb otpadanje points to this being actually a continuous or gradual process. But also it's interesting that when we say something is otpalo, falling apart, like parts of a facade falling from the building, it also carries the meaning of a ruinous state of things from the original structure, from where the things fell out. Also, like, wasting was translated in this book, I think, well, but it has completely different roots, and this is odbacivanje, meaning throwing away from ourselves, disposing, expelling, excluding. And what we throw away, bacamo, is immediately in our language conceptually fixed as waste, as otpad. It's interesting that commoning is a very different practical and translational issue. Practice of commoning that Marco offers as means of resisting the socio-ecological violence of disposing people, spaces, and living things by the Wasteocene is translated as poduševljenje. And this translation and its meaning are much more open, I think, to critical reflection, and naturally the word and the concept as well resonate much less in our collective consciousness in the Balkan region than does the negative richness of the word otpad, waste. But I want to finish up with another interesting example of branching present in our language that stresses the specificity of and the emancipatory potential of those who are wasted, the ones in the logic of Wasteocene, to the noun otpadnik, which is plural is otpadnici, and this means renegades, fugitives, dissidents, the ones who counter apostates. So I'm really, really happy, and I hope that this is only the first translation of this book, because it resonates really well. And when something resonates in language, I think it means that it has deep significance. So dear Marco, welcome to the local dumping ground called Belgrade, to the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. On behalf of Critic Lab IFDT and Solid Care Lab IFDT, hopefully in this short time we have together, we can invoke at least a small toxic fire to dance around. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for this, Vera, for this very generous introduction, also for clarifying all these things about the languages. And maybe we can say something later on. I want to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for inviting me, for translating the book, the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, and my dear friend Armiero Arsenievich, because without him, I wouldn't be here, I guess. I have prepared something, and I am going to read because apparently in this way I will not go beyond 7. Okay, so this is what I would like to tell you today. So respiratory failure due to COVID-19, the patient needs to be intubated occasionally, opens eyes, grasps hands, and requests to sleep. He vomited in the evening. We increased the propofol dosage, but the patient is very scared, started coughing, and attempted to sit up in bed to vomit. The situation is critical. Contact the family. From Marco's hospital diary in the intensive care unit, Stockholm. Because the Wasteocene, the era of waste, is never impersonal. It's not like the Anthropocene, the geological era of humans. It's something you do not just read in books or hear scientists explaining on TV. The Wasteocene mixes with your body, you breathe it in the air, often starting to ingest it with breast milk. The Wasteocene enters homes, kitchen, and bedrooms, certainly those of those who have home. I wrote this book. During my long convalescence, I became seriously ill with COVID-19. I was at risk of dying. I said goodbye to my family over the phone because according to the doctors in Stockholm, I might not survive the night. So I wrote this book when I left the hospital after a month with 15 kilo less, a strange voice due to intubation, and strange monsters that appear every time the evening fell and darkness brought me back to the coma of the intensive care unit. How can I talk to you about this book without telling you all this? You will find these things in the book as well. My life mixes in the pages of the book. Illness peaks through the data on toxic waste and the Aglobushi landfill in Ghana, because the Wasteocene, the era of waste, is never impersonal. It's not like the Anthropocene, the geological era of humans. It's something you do not just read in books or hear scientists explain on TV. The Wasteocene mixes with your body, you breathe it in the air, often starting to ingest it with breast milk. The Wasteocene enters homes, kitchens, and bedrooms, certainly those of those who have home. Everyone is digging. For some for one reason, some for others. BP, which used to be British Petroleum, but now goes by Beyond Petroleum, the power of words apparently, digs very deep wells, even into the sea, in search of oil, precisely. Mountains are dug into the Susa Valley in Italy to make way for the high-speed train, progress that rushes like useless train, like useless progress. After so much digging, geologists have decided that after all, we haven't entered the Anthropocene, but it does not matter. All that narrative digging has left us with the belief that we have entered an era marked by human actions. But what would we see if we could dig into people's bodies? What layers would emerge? In the body of a worker, we would find traces of the Asbestocene. For miners, we would find the Silicocene. For agricultural workers, Glyphosatocene. For all subalterns, the Wasteocene, the era in which capitalism produces people and communities to be discarded, to be thrown away, who are worthless once every last drop of value has been extracted from them. Words are powerful. Anthropocene sounds so neutral, scientific, clean. You say Anthropocene, and you already feel like a scientist, don't you? Instead, we must invent new words, ones that reveal and do not conceal. Capitalocene is one of these powerful words. It says that it's not us, the human species, that has caused this planetary mess, but an economic system based on exploitation. The Plantationocene is also powerful. It tells us that the current ecological crisis originates in plantations, in the colonial empire, in slavery, and racial capitalism. Forget about the species. The Wasteocene points to toxicity. If the Anthropocene is a planetary and disembodied narrative, the Wasteocene instead speaks of communities, of bodies, and of how a way of producing and consuming transforms the living into a gigantic socio-ecological landfill. So, as Vera said, the Wasteocene is not the age of waste, present everywhere on the planet. It's not a refined academic label used to complain about the dirtiness of our cities. And it is not another word to describe the familiar environmentalist nostalgia for some paradise lost in the past. You know, sometimes it's better to lose the paradise because generally the people in paradise, they're dead. In reality, the Wasteocene concerns cleanliness and sterile environment as much as dirtiness and contamination, because in its true essence, to discard means to decide what and who has value and what and who does not. But the Wasteocene is not just about toxins, fine particles, pesticides. To function, the Wasteocene poisons the Wasteocene poisons our lives and our stories. The Wasteocene is sustained by toxic narrative infrastructure that silences or normalizes the transformation of entire communities into dumps. The greatest success of the Wasteocene is convincing us that if you are poor, if you are sick, unemployed, if you live in a neighborhood where everything is falling apart, well, it must be your fault. For me, what sabotages the Wasteocene and makes the garden is not the natural decay of capital or nature reclaiming the city, but commoning, as Vera said. Commoning is the antidote to the Wasteocene. Just as the Wasteocene produces and reproduces through relations of exploitation and consumption, commoning is made up of relations of reproduction and care. I do not believe it's about learning to live with toxicity. Yes, I will obey. I think I need a couple of seconds. I do not believe it's about learning to live with toxicity or healing from toxicity as if it were an individual illness or a virus that has caught us. It's about freeing ourselves from the toxic relationships that construct the Wasteocene that profit a few from the destruction of life. It is about sabotaging the toxic narratives that justify and invisibilize the Wasteocene. It's about imagining and practicing commoning against the logic of the Wasteocene. And as scholars, it's about contributing to sabotaging the toxic narratives that normalize or conceal injustice and bringing forth resistant memories, insurgent archives that tell the stories no one has ever told us. Thank you, and sorry I was a little bit longer.
Thank you so much. Damir, please, you have the word.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you all. First and foremost, thank you, Vera, for giving us this wonderful linguistic anchoring, you know, within which we can kind of develop the discussion. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my dear friend Zona Zaric, who also made this possible. So I hope that she's online and following this. And I'm very grateful that IFADATA is hosting this event. I'd like to thank Marco for surviving, you know, to write this book. And his story is very personal around this book. So is mine around the translation of this and my decision to persist with Cambridge University Press for almost a couple of years to persuade them to allow for the translation to take place. So, but in the end, we are here. Deeply personal story it is for me because I've been working and living in Bosnia and Herzegovina for the past 20 years now, almost. And the idea kind of developed, and I first started working on the questions of genocide and missing persons in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it was really interesting to me that the more I researched this and the more I worked with the workers of privatized factories, the more kind of this toxic waste that was left in the aftermath of this of these privatizations actually took the shape of one and the same thing. So the same logic that was used to hide the bones from the crime of genocide and executions was used to hide toxic waste. And it was really interesting to me to actually find the thread that connects the two, because one and the same logic and one of the same politics became visible as operative and governing. So for me, it was really interesting then to think about how wasting as the principle, and I think odbacivanje is really wonderfully translated here as you know, in English, there are two, because of course English is a very rich language, because it's like a magpie, having borrowed from Italian in the 13th century, everything, and French. So there is waste and there is refuse, right? So in refuse, there is the refusal. There is this kind of way of rejection, disregarding, avoidance. So it was really interesting how wasting as a relation became operative in particularly during the war against Yugoslavia, and in this the so-called Dayton Peace Agreement arrangement in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which actually at the bottom of its architecture set up different socio-environmental relations than existed in the socialist Yugoslavia, right? And in Yugoslavia, particularly during and after World War II. So for me, it was really interesting to engage in a subtomal reading of waste and read the reality of Dayton Peace Agreement and reread the war against Yugoslavia as the process of wasting. And in terms of that, it's, you know, wasting as the destruction of the political subject, of radni narod, right? And the destruction of društvena svojina, right? And this is why commoning is really problematic for us who have the experience of having lived in Yugoslavia, because once you're in the domain of, you know, public, private, you're already in the domain of management, right? Društvena svojina was a way of setting up different types of social relations in relation to the property. So, and this is why podržavljavanje is really an interesting angle to which to think about a bit of a lower way of social organization that entails in the commons. And this is why there's always this kind of discrepancy when we are using Anglo-American terms to think about these social relations. That's why commoning is a bit of a lower political grading. So for me, see, I'm not like as obedient as Marco, so I probably have a couple of minutes, right? 2 minutes. So it was really deeply personal for me working in these communities, particularly working in Tuzla, working with the workers whose factories were destroyed, working in the communities that actually labor and work for 24 hours a day, metabolizing the toxins for somebody else's profit. So our working day is extended. We become filters for somebody else's profit and we die, right? It's really interesting to work with the workers, with those who enter these sites, metal pickers, who then inhale leftover chlorine and die, their lungs collapsing. You know, so it's interesting for me to start with this proletarian lung and rewrite the history of the destruction of Bosnian and Yugoslav industry for this. And this is why wasting is conceptually important for me, precisely in order to reframe the ways how we resist and antagonize this Wasteocene. And I think I'm very grateful to Marco to have set up these coordinates for us to take action, but also to think and conceptualize ways of antagonizing the Wasteocene. Thank you.
5 minutes if you want to in any way address what Damir opened up comment.
Okay. Well, thank you, Damir, so much. I was taking some notes. One thing that it's interesting for me, and it's also a little bit what also Vera was saying, is the relationship with the Anglophone empire, no? Because we are, I mean, many of us, including myself, we are writing in a language that is not ours. Even if my accent, you might think that I'm from Oxford, I am not from Oxford. I know that you will be very surprised. So we are using a language that is not ours. And I mean, I am not, I mean, I live in Catalonia now. So I I do see the power of English as a common ground for us to understand, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to be here and to talk with you. I am not sure that I am actually talking in English right now. I think I'm talking some kind of English that you are able to understand. And I believe that this creolization of English is a way to hacking the language. So this is interesting. I believe that what is scary for me is not when I write or speak in this more or less English, is when I think in English. And this is making me more worried, because I can give you one very simple example. In many of my articles, sometimes I have spoken and written about territory. So the idea of, territory struggles, so territory and so on. And always there is a reviewer, generally reviewer number 2. I don't know who is this. I mean, do you know who is reviewer number 2? He's a terrible person, by the way. And I don't understand why it's always, I think it's the only one, more or less following me. Anyway, reviewer number 2 generally say, no, you're Italian, you understand. It's not territory, it's community. And, in the end, I give up. Sure, you want community, get community. I mean, I cannot care less. But there is something interesting in the fact that we are forced to think in a language, not just. I am thinking now, about the feminist, eco-feminist scholars from Latin America, body, territory, colonization. Colonization goes through the body that is also territory. But it's Latin America, so it doesn't count. So you need to. So this is scary, and I like the reflection. I don't have an answer, as you can imagine, as always, but I like to think with you about this. Commoning is not translated. I mean, no one was able to translate it. So I have so far the Italian translation, the Spanish translation, well, the Chinese translation, we don't want to talk about it. And then the Bosnian translation and the French translation. They have decided to stick with the English, with commoning, and then have a footnote explaining. It's sad in a sense, but for me, it's important to keep this word because it's against, and I'm stopping here, it's against reification, because we are always reifying things, no? So the ecological problem is about waste, it's about CO2 emissions or whatever. Or, in Italy, for instance, we talk about commons, beni comuni, it's in Italian, commons. But I believe that we must shift from the thing to the social ecological relationship producing the thing. And it's not just an intellectual thing. Academics, we love to talk about things that are generally useless. It's actually a political practice, because if commons is a thing that you need to protect, well, we are fucked up. Can I say something? We are in a bad situation because, from, the enclosures have already take away everything, it's capitalist primitive accumulation. But if we can do commoning, we can take away from capitalist appropriation now, today. We are not defending something that is left over by capitalist primitive accumulation, but we are taking back things. So it's an important practice. And understanding that waste is not a thing, but is a socio-ecological process of oppression, extraction, I think it's important because it gives also us the possibility to antagonize it.
So I give the word to Andrea Filipovic. Andrea, please.
Thank you, Vera. So first, I want to say how happy I am that this is happening here in Belgrade, because there's so little precious environmental humanities within Serbian academia. So I hope this is a first, however small, step toward establishing something more permanent in that regard. Second, I want to talk for a bit about commoning, and I'll start from Vera's call that she extended to me. She called me just as I was finishing with the text on the Vinča landfill. It's the largest landfill in Serbia. It's a couple of kilometers down the Danube. And I was writing about waste eventfulness and how a weird kind of temporality is produced through Vinča. because every year Vinča self-combusts. So we get billows of smoke all across Belgrade, and it also leaks into the Danube, and all sorts of stuff's going on there. So I was interested in seeing how that's happening, those goings on, those events or eventfulness participates in production of particular kinds of temporalities here. And from one point of view, because here I see all of our issues happening within post-socialist condition. And it's a specific kind of temporality, post-socialist condition, because it's something's over, but something has not happened yet. And there's that delayed temporality there because we're always expecting something, and something's always promised, but it hasn't occurred and probably never will. So there's that aspect, and it influences infrastructure and waste and discard practices as well. So partially that contributes to the waste in eventfulness because the infrastructure is crumbling. Waste infrastructure, but all other kinds of infrastructure. So that was one aspect that I want to talk about here, because true, wasting is a process, and you're right how I get the impression that wasting is a linear process. So it turns something into waste, and then it's one-way street there. While commoning is about circularity, introduction of circularity. So it's about reproduction. And I'm wondering how reproduction is possible within this delayed time, because delayed time isn't linear or circular. It's weird time. It's neither here nor there in temporal categories. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts regarding that, because from this point of view, post-socialist point of view, neither linear nor circular temporality is actually the lived temporality. So that's one side. And also my readings and my theoretical practice is also informed by queer theory. So I'm especially sensitive to different temporalities. And when commoning is seen as a circular time of reproduction, I wonder what kind of other temporalities are then both included and excluded because of the reproductive aspect of that circularity within commoning. So it actually, yeah, that's what I had to say. So thank you.
Andrea. Sorry, my pronunciation is ridiculous. Thank you, Andrea, for this really interesting and especially because you made me think about something that I didn't, which is always the best. So I am probably struggling because it's something that I didn't reflect enough, but I will try to, how can I say, to reflect with you rather than answer you. So one thing that it's, well, I like a lot this idea of, the post-socialist condition as an experience of waiting for a promise that never happens, no? I think it's a beautiful way. However, I was thinking, but it could be a stupid comment, okay? Don't take me too seriously. Yeah. But I was thinking, if this is not the condition for many of us, I am well, maybe you are wondering, my politics are not clear, I am very reserved about my politics, I guess. But if you are wondering, I am a Marxist scholar. And I mean, for me, it was like that, when I was, especially when I was younger or young, I was always waiting for a promise that never happens, right? So for me, commoning, for instance, is also an answer to this. because in a sense, while many of my people from my generation, we were actually in this kind of cathartic mode, so waiting for, you know, something to happen, I believe that commoning is a more, performative kind of politics. So we are living today what we would like to see. So commoning is the revolution as it is now, is happening now. And I believe that this is very interesting for me, and it's also very new, because we were always, you know, thinking that something would happen. There was this almost religious promise of, you know, some kind of, you know, salvation to come. And, you know, the salvation never come, as you can imagine. So yeah, I think that this is interesting, the performative aspect of commoning. Then you are right about waste linear and commoning circular. But maybe I think that probably I should have been clearer in the book, because I think that capitalism can also produce a circular wasting. I try to say something about this in one case in the book, but probably not very, very well explained. So in the book, there is one case about Rome, Italy. It's a case of an abandoned factory, right? As always, abandoned factory. So it's ruined. And, you know, it was actually abandoned for, if I'm not mistaken, like, you know, 30 years. So really, you know, abandoned. And at a certain point, somebody decided, an investor developer decided to transform this abandoned factory in a shopping mall. So you might see some kind of circularity here. I mean, the paradigm of circular economy is precisely this idea that you can close the circle, that you can have green capitalism. And now it's time to laugh, right? You can have green capitalism. And so you close the circle. So I think, and this is why I am not proposing, I could say that, you know, the antidote to wasting relationship is recycling, you know? I could say that. And I didn't, because I believe that recycling can be part of the wasting relationship, because the point is not to put something again, you know, to extract new value from waste, but actually to say no to the logic of extraction. So in this sense, well, I mean, I think that you point to something that I should try to work more theoretically and try to avoid, because I think it's actually not a good thing, this, as you described, you know, waste, linear, and commoning. I think that I should be more explicit about the fact that waste and wasting can be also circular, and the different temporalities are absolutely, and I think what is left out, what is included, queer theory. I mean, I have the impression, this is maybe something we can discuss a little bit more maybe in the Q&A, because there is, I mean, you are probably the expert here, so, you know, but I mean, I have the impression that there is an idea about the possibility, you know, to embrace our monsters, to embrace hybridity, to embrace diversity, nothing. I mean, many times I was in a workshop like this, but less friendly. And people were, you know, criticizing me, say, you know, Marco, you have a very primitive and elementary understanding of toxicity. And they were telling me toxicity does not, no, sorry, purity does not exist. Everything is contaminated. You know, I had my ear examined and I am also toxic. Everything is toxic and so on and so on. So I answered this colleague from Germany, actually, that if it was like that, was she willing to move to Morro de Babilonia, the favela I was working in Brazil, and to do an exchange? So her family would live in Morro, and the family that I knew could move to her place in Munich. And she was very upset, because purity does not exist, agree? It's a racist, you know, construction, but toxicity does. If we do not understand that there is a difference in the exposition of toxicity. So of course we live in a toxic world, but believe me, I work in a department, not in the cancer, you know, world of a petrochemical factory. I still believe that there is a difference in this. And so I believe that the point is to accept the possibility that for me, the hybridity and the power of hybridity is in pushing back the idea of purity, but retain the idea of justice. So I believe that, without retaining the idea of justice, we end up in this, fantasy world in which somebody from Berkeley will write about, we will be saved by the ruins of capitalism and, it will be fine because, something will happen in the ruins. Sure. Especially if you live on the Berkeley Hills. It's much more complicated if you live in a contaminated neighborhood where the factory is actually killing your deers. But I believe that here the issue of temporalities is also an issue about memories, because the point is that something has the privilege to have a temporal span and other things do not, because some things is just disappearing and actually cancel, normalize. For instance, it's natural while it's historical. And I think as an historian, I believe that issue is not so much to preserve the memory of something, because, it's not like frozen something in the fridge, but it's more like to understand how memories are built, contested, challenged, and, in the end, to make a decision which memories you stand for.
Okay, Marco, a good introduction to our next speaker. Unfortunately, I have to stop you here.
Yeah, I should. You should.
But I'm glad that you open this new line, and I really hope that there will be enough time for also Andrea to give some kind of response and for everybody else to join in. So I want to call up our next speaker. So unfortunately, he wasn't being able to join us here in person. This is Vukan Markovic. Vukan, the floor is yours.
Hello. Do you hear me all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for the chat. And also thank you, Vera, for the semiotic and semantic introduction to this story. I'd like actually to begin with a very interesting point that happened 2 weeks ago. And for those of you who don't have the misfortune of having to follow the proceedings of International Geological Union, I actually had to watch that. And actually 2 weeks ago, it was decided that we are not in the Anthropocene. And we actually had the most interesting session of the International Geographical Union ever, because it ended up in a major split between the group that believes that we live in the Anthropocene and the group that believes that we are not in the Anthropocene. What is spectacular that the International Geological Union, one of the most boring institutions of the kind, actually started looking like the Serbian parliament for a while, which usually would not be a commendable state. But in this case, it is actually very interesting to what we've been speaking so far, especially because the reason why the split happened. In fact, the split is so deep that currently they're writing op-eds against each other in The Guardian. Namely, everybody agrees on the 3 basic premises of the Anthropocene: that the humans are becoming a geological force, meaning that our planet has been defined for billions of years by blind forces of nature, and that now it has been directed by a conscious power, that this power is working against us in extraordinary speeds, and that the 3rd premise would be that this power constitutes a existential threat to humanity. What is interesting is that the type of confusion that exists among scientists and geologists is actually very similar to the type of confusion that exists amongst social scientists, historians, philosophers, and everybody else within our disciplines, with our humanities, who discuss the Anthropocene. Namely, we all agree that we are approaching, or we have already approached, a bifurcation point in history, that there is something about humans that threatens the humans themselves. What we don't agree about is whether the scale, spatial scale, temporal scale, global scale of it is something that we should observe from a universal standpoint or something that we should observe from a standpoint of those who are most threatened. So although I'm not saying that clearly as I said, the discussions by geologists are extremely boring from our standpoint, the discussion that are happening on both sides of the Anthropocenic life, the political on one hand side and the natural on the other hand side, are actually very similar. They, in fact, constitute the idea of whether we can name something universal or not. And this is why I decided to start with this small little episode from the proceedings. And I wanted to refer to what Professor Armiero said in the beginning, in this proliferation of various scenes that came out from the concept of the Anthropocene. I understand his Wasteocene as a very, very interesting addition from the reasons that could actually help us conceptualize the ideas about the Anthropocene in a interesting direction. Namely, within the entire literature about the Anthropocene, about the question of what is it about the humans that is questioning the existence of humans, what is it about the Anthropocene that poses an existential threat to all of us? What is it about the current crisis? What is it about the Anthropocene that measures the current crisis of us? We find in the Wasteocene an interesting way to combine this idea of, on the one hand side, this dread against universalism, and on the other hand side, this idea that we can perhaps combine various ways in which all those who suffer from the Anthropocene the most can be integrated in one larger narrative. But what I think is most interesting here is that no matter how we perceive this, we always end up dancing on this thin thread between universalism on the other hand side and let's say the correct way of addressing it, basically addressing the victims on the first hand side and addressing the idea that there is something inherently ununiversal about the Anthropocene, about the Wasteocene. So from that standpoint, I find here, I would have, because we have quite a short time, I have like two major points here. Wasteocene, on the one hand side, allows us to observe something about the actual human condition that produces this bifurcation point in human history. This idea of othering, this idea that we are able to define things in such a way that they are outside of us, that we produce these relationships which create waste as something inherently alien to us, as something inherently external to us, as an enemy. On the one hand side, Wasteocene, in that case, allows for universalism, allows for a story about a human condition that has ushered entire humanity in a completely different historical existential direction. On the other hand, Wasteocene, in the way, let's say, we have it presented here, more or less corresponds to what we talk about when we talk about the Capitalocene, because Wasteocene is seen in this way as a, let's say, more potent version of the Capitalocene. So this is, I think, the shortest and the most important comment I had. I believe, clearly I favor the first one, but I believe we have a confusion in the sense that we either provide for a concept that will allow us to define the crisis as a human condition, or we have a concept that is actually a subset of one of many scenes that arise from various political, social, economic, and so on considerations regarding the nature of the Anthropocene. I will leave it at this point, and hopefully we can come back to some of these issues later on.
Thank you, Vukan.
This time I am going to see how much I am talking, because I think last time I talked too much. I own, Andrea, something, because you mentioned the fact that the environmental humanities are not so, how can I say, developed here, and I want just to say, let's do it. Damir and me, we have been working about this for a long time, and we really would like to, to build something. And I believe that it's interesting also politically, because the environmental humanities so far are extremely, North European centric and, US centric. And I wonder what would happen if we flip them up. I believe it will be not just a geographical thing. But anyway, go back now immediately to, well, you're completely right. That we are not in the Anthropocene apparently, and the geological decision that came up, yes, maybe a couple of weeks ago, was that there was a vote, and the vote actually is contested, even on a very procedural way. But one thing I want to say is that I believe that we need also to make a distinction between what we could call the geological Anthropocene and the pop Anthropocene, because the pop Anthropocene will stay with us anyway. And also it's relevant here because I didn't submit the Wasteocene to the Geological Commission, Stratigraphic Commission, because of course, I am not saying that the Wasteocene can be considered a proper geological era. I am not looking for the golden spike, the golden spike, of the Wasteocene. I completely agree with you, and I thank you, because I believe that the Wasteocene is more like a conceptual tool, or to be a little bit less ambitious, a window through which you can try to look at something happening. It's as I said precisely, is a lens, is a window to look at something. And I also I want to thank you, because I do believe, as you said, that the Wasteocene is also a challenge to this global local dichotomy, that the Wasteocene is local, is embodied as much as it is global and universal. One thing I want to say is that for me, it's very important that the last chapter, and this is the last thing I want to say, this is the last chapter in the book. I have a chapter which is like a conclusion, an epilogue. And for me, it's important because, especially in, I don't know, in social sciences, I don't know if you would agree with me, there is this idea, which is a very neoliberal idea, about the creative destruction. So basically, in order to make a point, generally, you must say that everybody else was wrong, that you are coming with something so new, and it's your thing, and you are the inventor. Actually, many colleagues and friends said, oh, you are so lucky. You invented your words. Now your H index will grow. So I would say that I didn't invent anything, and I am in debt to the people who have been working on this before me. So without Jason Moore's Capitalocene, without Stefania Barca, Forces of Reproduction, without Damir's work on the proletarian lag in Bosnia, without the work of Cedric Robinson on racial, I can go ahead, and that my book wouldn't stand. So of course I am happy if people are, as in this moment, people want to engage with my work. But I don't want that this engagement means that I have invented something, as if the only way to make a point is to, to repeat the neoliberal individualization of production of knowledge. And the book is dedicated to a group of activists I've been working very close in the last 20 years. the Stop Biocide activists in Naples. Without them, the book would not be possible. So this is maybe one thing I want to say, but I believe that your point about the global universal, can we name something that it's universal but still keep the issue of the local, it's very very important. And in the end, I would argue again that the problem with the Anthropocene, I mean, I have no problem about the geological Anthropocene. The problem for me is the pop Anthropocene. If we end up thinking that we live in the age of humans, in which the human species have done this and that, well, I am not following. Because I don't know you, but I have never met a human in my life. What I mean is that I have met, you know, a Serbian professor, an Italian worker, an indigenous people in Brazil, a single mom in Rio de Janeiro, and so on and so forth. The human is just the fantasy of capitalists try to pretend that we are all responsible for something. It's the individualization of responsibility to keep the structure of injustice.
I give words to Marian Ivkovic, please.
Thanks, Vera. I'm very, very happy to take part in this discussion. And I also consider the concept of Wasteocene very, very heuristically fruitful, but also very politically fruitful, as it gives a very concrete shape to something that is often very abstract in the language of the left, and that is the idea of structural domination. You know, that's one paradox that the left is facing. How do we politically mobilize large numbers of people by explaining to them the nature of domination in capitalism, but in such a way that is not at the same time alienating in one specific sense, namely that it is very, very abstract. And Wasteocene, as you say, it's always embodied. It points to the fact that the relations of structural domination are actually inscribed into our bodies. And now I'm also interested in all those types of symbolic domination that you mentioned that are involved in reproducing and justifying the logic of the Wasteocene as structural domination. You mentioned erasure, domestication, and also at one place you mentioned the production of divisions among those people who stand up against the logic of the Wasteocene. You give the example of solidarity brigades in Milan during COVID as an instance of what has been called disaster communism. But there is also an example of how symbolic domination works in that context. On page 50, you say, the Wasteocene logic immediately reacted to the kind of political imaginaries mobilized by the solidarity brigades. Wasting relationships are powerful, especially when they convince subaltern people that someone else is the other, while they can consider themselves on the safe side of the Wasteocene line. Now, of course, this is a very old type of domination. It's basically divide and rule. But I think it's very interesting also, and the example in the book is the Solidarity Brigade in Milan occupying one abandoned building, and then the police storming in and evacuating the building forcefully, but also using racist tropes to argue that basically these are Roma people who have occupied the building, in that way producing the kind of divisions between, you know, those who consider themselves still within the capitalist society and those who are completely on the outside. I think there is a new element in this type of domination today. And now, let me just try to explain briefly. So your book was written during COVID, and it is full of political optimism because of that. You know, you're arguing, as many of us have hoped for, that this crisis will bring about radical change, or at least more energetic forms of mobilization against structural domination and capitalism. Now, one wonders 4 years later why there were so few emancipatory achievements in the end, why instances of disaster communism did not grow, did not expand, and why we seem to be worse off now than before the pandemic, at least in some ways politically. Now, I would put forward one kind of tentative argument, and that is that neoliberalism has succeeded in making political agency, by which I mean ordinary people's ability to affect changes on a macrostructural level, a scarce resource. And now one important toxic narrative of today is therefore something I would call the promise of agency. And there's various kinds of it, but let's, for example, take what is called neo-authoritarianism or right-wing populism. What do these political actors play on? They play on the promise of agency, basically on a macrostructural level, at least in cultural or identity politics, restructuring the whole status order of society. This is what gives people a sense of political agency. Now, the Wasteocene dividing line is also the dividing line between those who have political agency and those who do not, until they rebel against it. When instances of disaster communism happen in times of crisis, involving people who are not all equally positioned with respect to this dividing line, then the type of symbolic domination that creates divisions between these people, it does not only reassure some of those people that they are on the safe side, it also reassures them that they have political agency within the system, that they can still try and achieve some kind of changes within the standard procedures of the system. And now this creates a tension in these very people between, I would say, two kinds of promise of agency in a situation of high uncertainty. On the one hand, we have the promise of agency rooted in the new collective that practices commoning. And this is, of course, very powerful in a sense because it's already taking place. As you saw, it's not some kind of abstract argument about changing the whole system, but it's already working. But on the other hand, it's also very precarious because it's also very concrete. It's also very small scale, and we don't know what's going to happen to it in the end. So that's, on the one hand, this progressive promise of agency, which is a real alternative. But then on the other hand, symbolic domination creates this sense that some of these people, at least those who are not entirely outside of the, on the wrong side of the Wasteocene logic, that they have alternative options, that they can still revert to the systemic position, and then they will have either the standard subject position of post-Fordist engaged citizen, for example, or the neo-authoritarian subject position, which also has some kind of promise of agency. And now these two kinds, the anti-systemic and the systemic promise of agency, are mutually incompatible, and people have to choose one. Which factors influence their choice? I would argue that one factor is the extent to which the new collective practicing commoning succeeds in articulating itself politically in a subjective, or we could say self-reflexive sense, in addition to being already objectively political in a very strong sense, of course, because it is challenging the very logic of capitalism and the Wasteocene. But by being subjectively political, I mean simply that the collective avoids the trap of being anti-political in its rhetoric, of seeing itself simply as some kind of enclave or a strategy for exiting from capitalism rather than a strategy of challenging and subverting it on a macrostructural level. Now, there are, I would say, socio-psychological reasons why people would fall for this kind of trap of anti-politicism. And one could be the modern ideal of authenticity, which we all have as well. An authentic collective has to remain a small collective. Otherwise, it loses the aura of authenticity. Now, if the collective doesn't articulate itself politically in this sense, then these systemic alternatives will appear to be better positioned to satisfy people's need for political agency to those who can be convinced that they are on the right side of the Wasteocene dividing line. And my question is simply, would you agree that these progressive political actors like the commoning collectives need to then articulate themselves politically as challenging the very macro structures of capitalism? And of course, is the concept of Wasteocene politically fruitful for that? Thanks.
Thank you. No, I was going for 7 minutes. No, absolutely not. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. So, well, I agree with what you are saying, and especially this idea. Well, you said now the structure of domination, and I mean, in your talk, I think there is maybe the big issue is what is the political, no? Where is and what is the political, how to mobilize the political. So one thing that I believe, I do believe that the Wasteocene can be interesting and can be even powerful is, for instance, to think about the political in different ways. I don't know about, this context, of course, but in many contexts, the political has a very clear template, I would say, no? So you become a political subject in a certain way, you read a certain kind of books, you speak in public, you go to the assembly, to the meeting, and so on and so forth. Well, for instance, in the Wasteocene, you become a political subject in the corridor of an hospital, where you discover that your kids are sick as the kids of your neighbors, and the politicization is passing through your body. So the body can make you a political subject. Or, for instance, I mean, the ambition of the Wasteocene is that the politicization does not imply, a certain set of skills, such as, talking in public, which is very typical of a certain kind of politicization, but it means to hear, to listen to, and maybe to learn how to listen to not only humans, but also non-humans. How can you listen to? And I mean, in another piece I have written, I was dreaming that maybe we can arrive to a point that militancy is a close relative of friendship, and try to think that love is a powerful tool for politicization. No, and I believe this is something that we can think about. No, so what is a toxic? The other thing that you said, that we have now a toxic narrative infrastructure, and by the way, the concept of narrative infrastructure, I have a debt to pay. It's not mine. Toxic narrative is an idea coming from a collective of writers in Italy, booming. It's a collective of radical leftist writers. They come up with the idea of a toxic narrative, and I expand on thinking about a narrative, a toxic narrative infrastructure. Why an infrastructure? Because we use the infrastructure without thinking about it. No, when today we shower, it's not that, okay, now the water is coming from, I don't know where it's going on. You just shower. But we do not realize that infrastructure is also shaping the way in which we act in our daily life. So it's, I mean, many times people think that, on one side there is the material stuff, on the other side there is the narrative stuff. This is wrong. There is nothing more material than a narrative, shaping the very way in which you imagine the world. Ursula Le Guin, the very famous science fiction writer, she said that we live in a crisis of imagination. And I believe this is the most important crisis. We are not even able to imagine another world. So anyway, commoning is precarious, I agree. I mean, also several of the examples in my book are shaking now. Even the lake in Rome is in a difficult situation now under the attack of the developers and so on and so forth. So absolutely. And I do believe that the thing that you said about, well, exit versus voice is so you said exit versus the politicization, the idea that, the commoning practice could also become just, an enclosure where an enclave, maybe better, an enclave where you are pure. And there is all this. I think there is also all this. Many times I remember I was interviewing a woman at a certain point, an activist, and I asked, one typical question was, did you have any previous political experience before? And she told me, no, actually, I was just a regular housewife. So I turned off my recorder, and going out of the house, I saw a very big picture on the wall. And I thought I saw her, and it was like in a forest. And I said, what is this picture about? And she told me, no, I am here, I am in the Amazon, and I am with the landless movement in the Amazon, maybe 10 years ago. I said, and you told me that you didn't have political experience. And she said, no, but this was with the church. And I believe that, this is why we are losing everything, because we are deciding what is political. So even the perception of this activist was that she didn't have political experience because it was, through the church. And she was, for like a couple of months working with the landless movement, the Centerra movement in the Amazon. I mean, I am much less political than her, for sure. So I believe that there is this issue. There is also, it's part of the neoliberal, of the toxic infrastructure, narrative infrastructure, that political is bad, because, everything political is corrupted, is divisive, and so on and so forth. So we need to reclaim the political, but we need to change the political. We need to convince people. I mean, I was in a committee, in a committee for a thesis now, a PhD thesis, and the candidate, she wrote that basically there was two examples. In one example, there is a lake in Brussels, and she said, well, the participation around the lake is not very political because they meet together to have a tea, to talk. In Rome, it's political because they have the monthly assembly. Can we say that we will not go anywhere in this way? Probably the tea in Brussels can be much more political than the assembly in Rome. I think that we need to sabotage the way in which the political has been taught. And we need to reclaim the possibility that the political is passing through different channels than we have taught. Then can we put together all these experiences? Well, this is challenging. It's a big challenge, but something is happening. And talking about the, positive or depressing thing, I agree with you. I was writing during COVID and so on and so on, but I also, let's put in this way. I don't know. Sometimes I'm wondering, is that, disaster communism is not happening, or is that we do not talk about it? Because, think about Hollywood. If there is an apocalypse, somebody will try to eat you, right? More or less, kill you, eat you, rape you, we can go. We don't do a movie, Hollywood blockbuster, on the fact that after an apocalypse, we are helping each other. No? So I don't know. I don't want to be too optimistic, but I also believe that things are happening even more than we are realizing. And we are, sharing and making public.
Thank you, Marco. I want to open the floor. Okay, so all people on Zoom, people in the audience, and we have the first one over there. Yeah.
Here, all these meetings this morning, our guests, but also my colleagues. I'm a researcher affiliated to this institute. And Marian, Vuka, and Vera, I love you guys. I'm very happy to actually be able to work with you and to exchange ideas every now and then. My background is in criminology, theory of social control, and also I'm a member of the largest regional ecological group called Ecostraja, that only last year actually became a formal organization, but previously for 4 years functioned as an informal group, and still being able to actually gather the largest amount of people on the streets in gatherings related to requests for the government to do something about air pollution. So speaking about necessity to change the way we conceive and think about politics, I think that actually Ecostraja might be a glance to what might be happening. And this is all about how elites are being formed. Throughout the history, all the social elites were formed according to an interest, a mutual interest. Whereas the new modern elites, like Ecostraja, are being formed around emotions. In Ecostraja, nobody knew nobody. We didn't know each other. And still we somehow informally managed to gather and to consistently be active on a topic that provokes emotions with us. So that's one thing. As a criminologist, I'm puzzled about Damir's inclination to speak about ecological violence. That's obviously something that we should speak about, but in my view, given the urgency that was highlighted today in several speeches, urgency to deal with pollution, this is undermining our agency to timely react and to actually do something. Because vis-a-vis normative systems, we are facing for decades now the process of proliferation of bylaws and standards. We have more and more flexible laws. It appears that we have more rights, but at the same time, we have such a proliferation of standards, even communal standards, that are restricting some of the very basic rights that we hold dear. So also when it comes to damage induced by different non-ecological activities, by and large, all of it can be very easily recognized as crime, and not just any crime, but organized crime. Because in order to be able to do that, you have to organize this activity. And of course, we all know the famous family of dedicated ecologists, Sopranos. And it's not, you know, the TV show about Italian mobster family that was screened for many years. So the Sopranos, their biggest venture is actually to deal with the dump and, you know, landfills. And I'm just throwing the thoughts as they were coming to me. When the colleague was speaking about Belgrade main landfill, Vinča, and this spontaneous combustion, this is, for me, an issue of again, state capture by basically a criminal clan, because this spontaneous combustion is happening due to appearance of a gas methane, and that is because we do not recycle. And if you would have the recycling organized properly, then we would not be actually facing this. And to make things even worse with this Vinča landfill is that in the entire country, there is not a single laboratory that is capable, that has means to monitor dioxins and furans, which are highly toxic, and they typically are being released during these spontaneous combustions on landfills. Mm-hmm. So another, just to finish, as far as what Marian was speaking about promise of agency, I would add to this this concept,
Alexander, please, because we have only 10 minutes.
The idea of autonomy. The autonomy is ever shrinking, so that is also something to consider in terms of what is holding people to engage. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Okay, we have also Vukan here online. Vukan, go.
I'll be very, very short. Can you hear me? Yeah. I just wanted to reflect on one point raised in the final response. It's basically if we remove the idea of human, and if we say that a pan-human concepts and categories, universal concepts and categories are something that should be avoided, I feel this actually removes the potency from Wasteocene as a concept. Whereas I politically fully agree and subscribe and fully agree that the idea of separating the perpetrators and the victims and holding those who committed the current condition accountable is necessary in any form of solution. The idea that producing waste, othering, alienating, wasting relationships, if we remove the, let's say, the universal tone to the idea, we are actually ended up in a fragmented way of thinking. And then basically Wasteocene becomes a scene that sort of emphasizes one relationship or another. Thanatocene, Capitalocene, Agnatocene, Anglocene, Thermocene, all those scenes, right? So the potency of the concept lies, in my opinion, in the potential and the capacity of humans to create a certain type of relationships. If we remove the humans from it, we end up in a fragmented concept, which in a way offers a fragmented solution. So if the commoning is the antidote to the current condition, then the condition itself is much more powerful if we believe in an idea of universality behind it. Without going deeper into sort of justification of so theories and so on and so forth, in a way, I think we do need to be able to coincide and correlate subalternity of it and universality of it in the same story.
Yeah. Okay. So Zoran, please also keep it very short. No.
Okay, so I want to refer only to the book, and I'm fully sympathetic. I'll do my worst English here, and yeah, because it's very dangerous to start thinking in English. I'm fully on the same page with you regarding this problem, because in your book you mentioned prehistory of the term in Italian scholarship, etc., etc. So this is a very important aspect for me. But also, I would like to focus to one particular let's say dualism. I would call it, let's say, people or whoever producing waste and social constructs or social systems producing people as waste. So this is like two terms and two distinctions that I would like to ask you to focus on. Let's say the terms wasting and disposable. So there is in French theory, this guy, Bertrand Rogeviec, wrote a book called L'homme jetable. So no one thinks in this context about him, for example, or not to mention décroissance as a concept that after 20 years became very popular due to hegemony of English language, etc., etc. As degrowth. So what is your take on this other part of this story, which is the most important for me, for example, and in terms of extractivism, sacrifice zones, and all these problems that are creating not just, as you say, disposable places or material stuff, but also disposable people, and how to deal with this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoran. So I would, we have there at the back also one. So what I would suggest is that we don't ask questions. So that a couple of minutes that we have, I would just give the floor to each of our speakers to very shortly close. So please give a comment. Of course, open a question for everybody, but just don't address it to Marco, because unfortunately there is no time to answer everything. But Zoran, important point, I think Marco would agree. So thank you. Yeah, go.
Okay, so I was just wondering about your or anyone else's thinking on this kind of also symbolic level of associating, or ideological role of associating waste with certain social groups, because we have, for example, with Roma people, who a lot of them make their living out of recycling waste and dealing with waste, which is of course a very ecologically conscious lifestyle, but is not perceived as such as, you know, a well-off person spending their Sunday picking trash from a beach. It's a very different type of perception. Or homeless people who, you know, eat from the waste that they find in trash cans. So this type of disgust that this produces, this kind of irrational emotion of disgust that we associate with these social groups, and that this disgust becomes a sort of justification of social stratification. And so how this process, how this Wasteocene, besides, you know, producing waste and producing communities that are to be, as you say, discarded, also through its consequences kind of legitimizes itself back, because we see those discarded as, you know, smelling bad and therefore deserving to be discarded, if you understand. So just this.
You're gonna enjoy Marco's book if you I mean, enjoy. You're gonna smell Marco's book from the words. Thank you so much. So I would suggest now that each take a very, very short time, just the closing, like any kind of closing thoughts. Maybe Andre, wanna start?
Yep, thank you, Vera, but I don't really have anything to add, so I will just give my time to somebody else who does.
Marian.
I'm also going to give my time to Marco.
Okay. Listen, I didn't expect this. Vukan.
I shall forfeit my time as well. I already spoke a second.
Now everybody
Okay.
feels bad. So yeah, Marco, please.
So I have 2 hours now, right? Putting everything together. No, well, thank you. You are very generous. I think I have talked even too much. This is an academic disease to believe that we have always something to say. And instead, I would like to say that I had something to hear, to listen to today. I have taken a lot of notes. Thank you so much for what I've learned, what you made me think. Let's say my project, my political intellectual project is not so much to sell the Wasteocene. I am not a good seller, I think, myself. My project is to give the Wasteocene as a monkey wrench. And with the monkey wrench, you can do many things. You can build something. You might want to sabotage something. It's up to you. You might want also to put it in the basement because you think it's not really useful for you. So I don't care, not in the sense that I don't care. I don't have, you know, an agenda to basically, as I said, sell the way in which I have framed the concept, but my project is to try to build this concept together with the people that want to engage with me. So I hope that you will find your own way to think with, eventually against the Wasteocene. For me, it's also fine, but to engage most importantly than that, most important than the fortune, the fate of this book, to engage with the fate of the planet. And I agree with what has been said. I mean, we need to keep the universality. We need to keep, I mean, mine was basically mostly a provocation. The point about acknowledging the differences is important because it's very strange, you know? You remember a few years ago, Notre Dame de Paris was on fire. And there was all this narrative, all this rhetoric saying, oh, our common home is on fire. We need to act. You know, all humans are coming together to save our common home. It's like the planet. But I don't know what you think, but in my impression is that if the home is actually not on fire, it's in good shape, you know, good home, they came with camera, with the alarm system, with swimming pool, with drinking water. You do not welcome everyone. So I am very uncomfortable that when Notre Dame is on fire, we are called to do something about the fire. But when we are in a good shape, enjoying our drink on the lawn, well, no one is welcome. So sometimes you just need to to break in the home and remember people that if they have all this stuff, it's not because they are good. They just stole all that from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Really happy we had a discussion. Hopefully, Marco, there will be opportunities to to continue, if not on Wasteocene, then on many other lines that environmental humanities bring. And the Institute here is definitely a partner in this. So yeah, unfortunately, there is not enough time, but we're very happy that there were questions. So because both Damir and Marko have to start their travel for Tuzla. So thank you, everybody, again. Until next time, I really recommend you to read the book and think about it. Yeah, thank you.